Every year is powerful, and every year is, in our culture, certainly about intention and intention making and thinking about intention. Which, it's funny, actually, the last couple of years, I'm sure it's, generally the case when you have clients to work with. Great Spirit has clients who are kind of on the same page very commonly, almost typically. And the one page I've been on has been about intention, Alexander's intention, in my own growth, our growth, but my growth, as a person, my growth as a soul, my growth as a practitioner, certainly. It's always in the back of my mind. And so, this retreat, of course, is called Igniting 2026, which I was thinking as I was prepping. Hopefully it's not sort of a premonition of its own, Igniting 2026. Sort of, we're kind of thinking, when we get into some of the cycles we're looking at, like, that's apt. No, that wasn't. This is kind of like, Western astrology, certainly, where you have newly discovered planets. Astrologer, since maybe you might know, I'm a very avid backyard astronomer, and that is how I started many, many decades ago. Typical Capricorn that I am. If you say you're an astronomer when you're 10 years old, 11 years old, people of course say, "Oh, you're an astrologer," and most astronomers go apeshit. Like their head just explodes off their shoulders. Like you've just insulted them. You couldn't. To an astronomer, that is the biggest insult you could give. Yeah, so don't go there. Don't make the mistake with astronomers. They'll get very hemorrhoidal. So I too had that. We're all inculcated, and a good thing. I mean, I always say, we are. I'm talking on science and have computer science over here, and a mic science, and I'm wearing science, and we're sitting in science. Science is pretty groovy. We kind of take it for granted that we're like literally in science at this very moment. So it does a lot of great things. Like we can, land an orbiter or maybe even a probe, proverbially, maybe not long from now, 4 billion miles away on Pluto, and you could mine Pluto and bring back Pluto soil. That's 4 billion miles. That's godlike. The moon, you could spit at it. It's only 239,000 miles away. The moon, 239,000 miles, is right there. So you could just, pick the cheese off the moon, right? It used to be, they thought in the 1800s there was maybe cheese up there, and the man on the moon. Oh, by the way, can someone grab some water for me somewhere? Yes. Maybe my beloved. Thank you. I meant to do that, but thank you so much, David. So when you talk, 239,000 miles away from the moon and 4 billion miles away for Pluto, interesting things start percolating. I think it was we were discussing, one of my childhood favorites and heroes was Carl Sagan, and he still is, although like all astronomers, he had a big problem with astrology particularly, and that's understandable from what they understand, or don't understand, really, which is understandable. Neil deGrasse, another, he was a hero of Carl Sagan, and Carl kind of passed the torch to Neil deGrasse Tyson, here in Manhattan at the planetarium, the Hayden Planetarium. And he also has a big problem with astrology, and from his perspective, actually, with his perspective, so do I, So this thing about distances, it brings to mind something that I'm paraphrasing Neil, but I think he said something like, if you had $1 billion, I think it was 1 billion. Thank you so much, David. Actually, yeah, it is David. Thank you, David. Oh, love you. Thank you. If you had $1 billion, if someone knows the phrase, correct me, please. Save me from myself. If you had $1 billion, I think it was something like you could spend $1,000 a minute, or something like 256 years, and you could have more left over. So, that's 1 billion, Now I think we have already hit one human being having 1 trillion. There's an astronomically exponential unfathomability to it. Although we can grasp and fathom our lives. So all this is kind of percolating, even a little bit in my nerves talking to people in front of a group. I live a pretty quiet life. And I was thinking about Bob and what he was sharing during his Dharma talk this evening. And I think the one thing that was hitting me was space-like equipoise. Space-like equipoise. And I thought, that's a great tagline for what, I can't speak for Western astrologers, certainly, but it's a good tagline for me. And I think it's kind of a good tagline for Western astrology. This idea of hitting a consciousness space, of space like equipoise. So, bringing us back for those of us here in Menla today who are participating. We're attending to Bob's wonderful Dharma talks, and this idea of kind of non-duality, reaching a point of oneness, or you're on your way to oneness. Is kind of the objective, and that's what astrology is for me. You're on your way to oneness, or as I say, for the majority of 8 billion of us, you're probably not born the Buddha, so you're a work in progress. And here we all are. That is the bottom line. So anything I might say at the magic hat tomorrow for people whose names I pick, or anything that might come up tonight. You understand, I definitely know I'm absolutely a work in progress. But there is hopefully too that mindfulness of that space-like equipoise. That's what the astrological work is about. It's really kind of like that relativity. That the moon is only 336,000 miles away. It's right there. You could touch it. Pluto's 4 billion miles away. Or like I say, one of my favorite objects recently, because Saturn and Neptune are traveling together, is of course to tune into Saturn through my observatory, but then to go to Neptune. This year I haven't had it happen. You have to have a really good still sky. But when the sky is really not, when it's not twinkling, when it's not scintillating, when it's really, really still, Neptune at 3 billion miles away is robin's egg blue. It is blue, blue, blue. Shockingly blue. There's something about it for me. Maybe it's the fact I'm also an avid bird watcher and have been since I'm 8 years old. I feel like maybe it's that space-like equipoise. There's some kind of a unity. I honestly think fellow amateur astronomers are having this experience and not knowing it. I'm hearing the great horned owl calling or the barred owl calling. I'm hearing what's going on, and they're discussing eyepieces. They are hearing it, but it's they're not getting it. But I know secretly, I think they're getting it. So the theme of this conference is lighting the fire of joy through compassion, igniting. And any form of igniting, whether it's spiritual ignition or other, it's good for us to have compassion and mindfulness. So all of this had me thinking about some of my earlier times here at this beautiful place, Menla, in this Panther Kill Mountain bowl, in this valley, in this potential meteor crater that we're sitting in. I used to live down the road, so I used to think, pretty cool, an astrologer or astronomer living in a meteor crater. And you can't, you got to order that one up special. It is special. And so I asked my friend and former director here at Menla if maybe Bob would be willing to entertain the idea of my doing a presentation here, which I entitled Astrology, Mythos, and Spirit, Bridging East and West. And I brought one of my long-term heroes, which is a big story, and go down there, definitely some K-karma there, A.T. Mann, genius, brilliant Western astrologer. And Bob invited a really celebrated, brilliant Vedic astrologer, Camilla Sutton. And Bob also invited somebody he knew, I believe, from his time in the Middle East and Tibet, Jampa Kalsing, who is an astrologer and a astrological medical doctor. Jampa Shainman, that's on that post there, couldn't attend. So we had Camilla and Jampa Kalsing, A.T. Mann, Alexander, and Bob. And so what was really cool about Jampa, a Tibetan astrologer, to tell us about Tibetan astrology versus Western astrology, which I practice, and Vedic astrology, which Camilla practices, and many of you know are studying Vedic astrology, is that one thing that hit me when Jampa shared is part of the cosmology, part of the work of a medical diagnostic astrologer in Tibet, is the first thing, to tell the client, patient, when they are going to die. And that is about as completely verboten in Western astrology. Maybe Vedic, I don't know, I don't think it's really big on their agenda either. But I mean, that is like, serious malpractice, and, you may have like, something bad could go down if you even started going there. There are, I forget, I was chatting with somebody, there are techniques, by the way, in the West. I remember the term, it was lifespan revolution, but anyway, we're not going to touch it. But that's the last thing that a Western astrologer does. But what's the premise of a Tibetan astrologer? The very first thing, telling you when you're going to die. So in my Western filter, and this is when, it's great, Bob, I hope you're listening, but maybe you can call in or something. But if you were here, you could clarify for me. So I think the premise is that if you know when you're going to die, you take sole responsibility for your incarnation to come to, whatever awareness you can in the time you're here. That's exactly what I do in my own way. I mean, isn't that the point? And that is a little bit from the little bit that I know. So if someone here is a Vedic astrology practitioner, you can chime in too if you want to. I think it's a little bit of a difference culturally in a cultural construct system of thinking, where I had a client last week who was Indian, born in India, asking about her daughter-in-law and the twin kids, and she wanted to just know what's going to happen to them and how's it going to turn out, and just that. And I don't want to hear any psychological or philosophical or emotional anything. I don't want to discuss any of that. Just what's going to happen to them and how's it going to turn out, and will they have a bad life or a good one, And I'm thinking it's like things are just, firing, and not synaptically connecting. Like, this is not where I go. This is really tough for me to do this. Like, this is really difficult. So we'll come to that in a bit. This conference, though, and through Jampa Kalsing, taught me not only that premise of Tibetan astrology, but also that Tibetan astrology has sort of two contributing paths. One is Karsti, if I'm saying it right, Karsti, which is really founded on Vedic or Hindu astrology, or Jyotish, some people call it. And it really originates from India in the Kala Chakra Tantra, cycles of time, as far as I know, as a kind of beginning student of Tibet studies, Buddhist studies. And then there's Jungsi. Jungsi is based on Chinese astrology, and Bon, the early Tibetan culture, Bon culture, and Chinese animism, the idea that everything is infused with creation. Everything is alive with consciousness, which I think it probably really is true. So Tibetan astrology has these two systems: Vedic astrology, that are borrowed from India, and Chinese astrology and Bon astrology concepts, which are animism and phenomenal divinatory arts. But as I write here, ultimately the practice of astrology studies cycles of time, the cycles of one's lifetime, the cycles of your growing. For a Western astrologer, and even most Westerners don't know, when we look at a chart, we're really just looking at a snapshot of the sky. I mean, it's astronomical sky. That's what it is. It's a pictograph of the sky at a moment that you come in out of mom's body after 9 months and 12 hours of labor. And at that moment, it's an event for her, an event for mom. And so that newborn is synaptically, picking up everything, and mom and dad are also doing the same. It's a joint venture when you're born. And we're tuning in. So, in that way, I would say to astronomers who let me get past the first word or two, that, the astrology premise is your season sign. Basically, for me as a backyard astronomer, if you're born during a blizzard, you're born during a blizzard, and what led up to that blizzard. If you're born during a garden party, or as I always joke with every client, you've heard it, so if you've heard it, close your ears. If you're born as Bill Clinton to Leo in the middle of August during a pool party, or maybe in his case, a margarita party, that's the formation of character. What's happening sociologically, emotionally, the environment above the equator, the environment dictates societal social consciousness. And the infant, the dog, the cat, and the little kid are absorbing everything right then. So when you think of maybe this idea of, Alexander's going to discuss cycles of 2026, or we'll discuss what I call the dirty P word, predictions of that's the word we should, eradicate that from our construct. You have free will always, thank God, the Western astrologer says, and your chart describes those cycles, that cycle that coincidentally your soul comes in, you're born as a child in whatever form, and this is imprinting mom and dad's experience. It's a big one for mom because she just had a human come out of her body. Not to be minimized. It's a big thing. So all this is what's cooking. All this is that's the psychic, phenomenon that's cooking when a child enters a system. And those seasons, those in Western astrology, those 4 seasons, those four forms of nature. And maybe it occurred to me you might want me to go through it really quick. So March 21st, when the sun crosses the celestial equator and we begin to have a little more warmth. I lived down the road. We had 4 foot of hard-packed snow here and up in the mountains. We had on April 1st 9 inches of rain. And these bridges over here, I thought, well, man, they overbuilt these bridges, didn't they? The Panther Kill turned into the Colorado River. I mean, I'm not kidding. Couldn't get home. It was raging. 5-6 months of winter, and March 21st, just a couple of days, a week into it, and suddenly a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of moisture, a little bit of rain, and kaboom, you have the explosion of springtime. So astrology describes, Western astrology, tropical, seasonal astrology, describes when you enter this system of creation. Well, when you enter this earthbound, I guess if we're ever born on the moon or Mars, we'll have to come up with some other archetypal interpretation for the experience. But while we're born on terra firma, we're all born in some phase of this experience. That's what it is. And so your so-called sun sign, your season sign, better concept. Because there's a framework around, it just doesn't blizzard like that. It takes time. It's a building phase and cycle. So we're discussing cycles. You could say, I could pick most anybody in this audience, and you can tell me the cycles of 2025 and 2026. It's all around us. You're observing and watching and taking. But astrology is this form of astronomical cycles that are coincident with human experience. And one of those coincidences, if you will, although it's, this is a complete malapropism. It's space like equilibrium. I think I get the right term. Equipoise. Thank you. Space like equipoise. You're born into this perfect system. It's like obviously it's the right time because you're there at that moment. Somewhere in that fire, earth, air, water. So you have sort of 4 couplings of this, 4 subseasons. March 21st, Aries, fire. The fire of the seed goes to Taurus. Then the seed goes into the mud. And then the mud, Gemini, has all the elements that are feeding that developing seed. And then you have the April showers bring May flowers, the flowering. Then you have the budding and the flowering. Then you have the fruit. And that's Cancer time, middle of the summer into Leo time, blueberry picking season. And then you have Virgo, the harvest. So we go from seed to the sun rising higher and higher every noon, the sun culminating in summer solstice and beginning to wane. It's a phase. But as that sun rises, you also have every noon hotter and hotter, right? So the earth doesn't shed the heat. So in August it's roasting, even though June you just had the highest sun at summer solstice, right? So think of your nature. When did you come in your nature? And what elemental season was it? Was it fire, the seed, March, the seed holds the fire of life. Was it fire, burning August, or was it fire, Sagittarius, lighting the hearth? So each of these signs of the zodiac talk about a sub-season and a season of these cycles of nature. You're born into nature, and you are part of nature. And the nature describes mom and dad's societal, social connection. That's the premise we're talking about here, right? So, of course, these 4 major seasons, the 4 turning points, are a really big deal. They help us gauge where we are. So, if you say, Alexander, your chart says you're born with the sun at 17 degrees of Capricorn, that's like saying, oh, you mean you're born January 7th? That's right. That's what that means. It's a calendrical, it's a system of nature. Paleolithic man, it is the lunar phase carved into the jawbone and or carved into the piece of wood, literally found in the caves in France. I think it was a cave in France. So Paleolithic man already had a very good grasp of astrology, astronomy. It was about the nature and the living and the surviving and the being in flow with an awareness of that flow. So we have the 4 major seasonal turning points. And then, even though this is my theory, and I think I've asked Bob about it, and I'll have to ask him again, for instance, the 8-spoked Dharma wheel. It looks awful familiar to me. And we see that replicated in the Celtic cross. We see the 4 major turning points, the 4 major seasons, and we see those inter-seasons, or those cross-quarter days. In bulk, which we're approaching midwinter time, which loosely correlates with Losar, the new moon of that midwinter time, oftentimes in February. In bulk, Beltane, mid-spring. Lammas, midsummer. Samhain, well, we probably know that one, Halloween. So we have our 4 major turning points and our 4 mid-season points. And all of us are born somewhere in that whole rhythm of nature. From the frozen, this time, winter solstice, the sun's lowest point at noon hour, where the sun rises and sets in no time flat. You think, the sun just came, don't go away so fast, but it comes up and goes down. And of course, in the Arctic, it never rises. So we're talking about your nature, your being in nature in these cycles. Well, I did something that I don't normally do because I'm not a Tibetan astrologer per se, but I was wondering, this particular one felt like this is a big, powerful time. I know it is, and Western astrology sure says it is, and has been saying that. Remember I said the cycle of the blizzard doesn't come out of nowhere. There's like kind of an entrance of cycles, long cycles. So those of you who've been here the last few winter solstice experiences have heard me progressively say, we got some big cycles. Now we've got 2 big cycles this year. We got 3 big cycles this year. We have 4 big cycles this year. We have 5 big cycles this year. We'll get there in a second. And this year, in the Tibetan astrology of things, says we are in the Tibetan year of the Yang fire horse. It is a 60-year cycle. And this is an important one, apparently, because the young fire horse really has this quality of like the stallion, surging forward, going forward, maybe breaking new ground. You could think of the Spaniards bringing horses here and what happened for Native Americans, breaking new ground. And the horse's nature is indeed passionate and freedom-seeking, etc. And of course, there's also a quality of rebellion or explosiveness or willfulness that this time period of a young male fire horse year. The Tibetan astrologers call it the cycle of, I think it's Zilnyon, I'm messing up the Tibetan, or evil crushing splendor. Well, that sounds very interesting. doesn't sound middle of the road to me as a Westerner. And this period, I'm going to move my little, maybe I can't do that. This period talks about some key time periods if you go back. So go back progressively every period of years. We see every 60 years the last young fire horse periods. Well, we have 1846, a peak of immigration to the U.S., for instance, the Irish potato famine, the German-Austrian Empire and European revolutions, Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto. A young fire horse year, a young male fire horse year, at this time of charging forward in 1846, immigration, people who were displaced, people who were categorically, forced to exit their homeland, their familiar, their safe zone to the unknown and the safe. Potato famine itself and the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848, just 2 years after. In 1906, the Naturalization Act of the U.S. to handle all these immigrants. We have 2026, male fire horse young fire horse year, and 1906, the first Naturalization Act of 1906 to address immigration laws. And of course, the famous book, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, which talked about the shocking wage slaveries of, mechanized mankind and more. And then more recently, 1966, the last young male fire horse year, civil rights, the Selma marches, Voting Rights Act of 65, Vietnam, the space race, Star Trek. I was there to watch the first episodes of Star Trek. And of course, the Beatles and John Lennon saying, we're bigger than Jesus. We're bigger than Jesus. Fire, it's like breakthrough fire periods. So I further dug in and I thought, well, what else may be out there? And I see that there are some prophetic ideas out there in Tibetan Buddhism, namely that was passed along by a wonderful Buddhist master. Hopefully, Bob, you'll listen to me here. Jamyang Khyentse Choki Lodro, I'm in the ballpark somewhere. So he was widely regarded as the most outstanding Tibetan master, or one of them, of the 20th century, known and celebrated as Master of Masters. He prescribed the practice used by Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion, he who hears the cries of the world. And with this practice of the great responsiveness meditation, one may very quickly begin to change, having an immediate pause in samsaric suffering. So in other words, his remedy, and what was written and handed down in scripture for the young fire male horse year, is this need for practicing the great responsiveness meditation. Now, this is one prophecy, and not necessarily a definitive prophecy or prophetic truth, from what I understand from Tenzing and others. But this prophecy was of biospheric collapse and calamity. I mean, I can get into the details of it, but you could read it yourself online. It's easily found. From 2000, note the years here, 2026 through 2032. And for those Western astrologers, 2026, Pluto ingressing into Aquarius, the Aquarian age, you could say, and 2043. So 2026 to 2032 is the Tibetan prophecy for Western astrology, 2026 through 2043. We'll talk more about that. So if all peoples have confidence in this text and devotion to it, a good time period will result. In the future, this is all paraphrased from this article, from the male fire horse year onwards, it is said that the various crises will gradually occur. After 500 years will be a time when the teachings of the spiritually awakened one will be on the decline, and monks' ethics and general conduct will become corrupted. When evil thoughts will occupy the mind, food supplies contaminated, there will be a time when the body and speech acts will be perverted, teaching of spiritual values deteriorate. This one caught my attention. A time when one will not compliment nor praise another, there will only be praise of oneself and putting down others. There will be basically 4 social groups: politicians, the rich, common people, and well-educated. So what I said last year, I can say again, folks. If you watch the movies, hold on to your butts. That would suggest that we might, do that. Hold on to our butts here. And so, here we have 2026. We have AI, we have robotics, we have Waymo cars crashing into each other. There's one of my favorite movies from Sleeper, Woody Allen. He's having a hard day where they're removing the head of one of the robots he's pretending to be. I'm not sure where I am in that robotic, but sometimes with this phone, which is always attached to my body for my clients, pretty much always, I'm kind of, Woody. Obviously, people who know me know I'm a little Woody Allen sometimes, So I thought I had to throw that in there. I don't know about you guys, but having robotics that look like that lady there, or something vastly improved in just a few years, I'm a little unnerved. It's unnerving for me. It's unnerving for me because what I've seen, Judeo-Christian Western culture do with this incredible spike in creation is we create these phenomenal things, but we are not great psychologically, emotionally. We have great, technological rise, but not the awareness of management. Wouldn't you think regarding robotics and such, maybe let's say start with AI, that we consider maybe the natural economics of it, right? In fact, right now in our own home community, which now is down south, they are land raping, I call it land raping, like crazy. Putting up land raping just flat to the ground, 3 golf course sizes, and there are houses and people in 4.5 months. I mean, it's shocking. It's just like wildfire happening. And now they want to put a mega data center because there are the convergence of 3 rivers. And where there's a convergence of 3 rivers, they need the water for cooling and for the data center, but they also need to draw apparently fresh water from the aquifer, which is already happening in Georgia with not good consequences. Technology, young fire horse. Don't we have a thing called fracking for the last couple of decades now? Water and freshwater issues, and now we have AI data centers. I mean, the computer has been really great, but do I really need, they say, a cup of water for every AI question I ask. That's how much it takes to cool. A cup of water. I kind of wonder, wouldn't you think you could take 3 rivers that have got a lot of mud and sediment and work on, borrowing that water, purifying it, and using that to cool rather than aquifers that we need and that our great-grandchildren need? Now, that's a little bit my proselytizing, sorry, but, as a birdwatcher naturalist, I think about these things freshwater aquifers, they are somewhat limited. And did I get along okay without AI answering my question in a millisecond? Doing okay. So what might come? What might happen? What's one of our next big things? Fusion, not fission, not nuclear plants, although we're building them like crazy soon. Fusion. That's going to be part of this AI revolution. In 2026 and these near years to come, the cycle that we're on, we're heading toward fusion, which could be amazing. And we might even probably will be mining lunar regolith, which is high in helium-3 isotope, which we can make rocket fuel and use for power. And it puts off very, very, very little radiation. So it's an incredible, incredible energy resource, except it's 235,000 miles away, on an irradiated body that you need to, somehow mine and return this material for use here. Cool idea, but again, could be concerning. So back to astrology here. Astrology as a tool of looking at nature's cycles and mankind's participation in nature's cycles. I mean, we're here in nature, that's for sure. When you have a big windstorm like last night, or you have a hurricane, or you have things like hurricane hitting North Carolina, I mean, you kind of know pretty quickly you're not totally in charge. So the environment, the inner environment, the inner development, the inner awareness, and then the interplay of the outer. The last 5 years or so, I've been practicing for many, many decades. And only the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, with most every client, I have the client's charts and their cycles that talk about their inner growth, their inner milestones of development, and where they are, where each of us are. Our charts mirror that. And then also I have the U.S. chart, for instance, for those of us here. Like, what are the outer cycles? Because no man's an island. You're in a system. So there are 5. This year there are 5 major things, not 4, not 3, like the last few years, although it's been kind of building into a crescendo here. There are 5 major cycles of 2025 into 26. The first is what's called the Neptune-Aries point, minor grand trine. I'll show you what that is in a moment. The second is, I referenced earlier, that 2026 prophecy, Tibetan prophecy, also 2026. The 2025-26 ingress moving into the tropical western zodiac sign of Aquarius, of Pluto. We'll talk more about Pluto cycles, which, by the way, astronomers name this stuff. When we discover it, astrologers don't. Pluto 1930, the beginnings of discovering plutonium 1935-37, plutonium 1940, and definitely we know plutonium 1945, right? Nagasaki, Hiroshima, little things like that. So Pluto in 1930, plutocrats, plutonium, plutocracy, other sort of plutonium. And Pluto, the planet named by an 11-year-old girl who drew lots. They drew lots of the names that were thrown in. An 11-year-old girl, I forget her name, named Pluto. The god of the underworld, the god of what cannot be seen. Like if I take you to my observatory, I can show you Pluto, but it's kind of like, you see those 3 faint stars? See that really faint star next to other faint star? That is Pluto. Not like Neptune, where, boom, you see Neptune. The third cycle, we have a Venus-Sun-Mars conjunction. Really, they say, in observation, in the shamanic sort of underworld, meaning they're with the sun, so when the sun sets, you can't see them at night. They're next to the sun. And every 32 years, therefore every 64 years, think about the 60-year Tibetan zodiac, young fire horse year that we're in. And so every 30 to 64 years, we've got this Venus, Sun, Mars cycle. And we'll talk about that. We have also now the continuation of 2023, 24, 25, an 18.6-year cycle of a major lunar standstill, like roughly a 20-year cycle. What does that mean? Have you guys noticed the last few years in wintertime, when the moon is full, it's way high overhead, like way, way high overhead in the winter, like, at the zenith. That only can happen every 20 years. And I'll talk more about that. And lastly, something that astrologers know nothing about, but astronomers think is really groovy, and it used to be about discovering the moons of Saturn and such, and also looking at storms on Saturn, which every now and then with an amateur scope you can see the storms on Saturn and equatorial rotation and what have you. Saturn's ring plane crossing, that happens every 15 years, and we are in a ring plane crossing year. And what happens is that Saturn's orbit and the Earth's orbit align just so that the rings of Saturn disappear from our line of sight. We'll talk about that. So 5 major cycles. One of them, the Neptune minor grand trine cycle, is itself a 500-year cycle wrapped into, and really the cycle we're having, the last time the calculations are still unclear. It happened 6,500 BC. Think about the cultural shifts around 6,500 BC. And we're going like post Göbekli Tepe and pyramidal here.
What does that mean? Judeo-Christian.
So 6,500 BC. It's kind of the rise of modern culture as we know it. The nascent beginnings, of modern culture until Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Archaeologists believe that the Western, cultured societies didn't really begin to form until roughly, 4,000, 5,000, 2,000 years ago. The Göbekli Tepe in Turkey has shifted that to 13,000 years, but that's another day. But we also just discovered that, by the way, over the last few years. What do you know? culture, community, a sense of oneness with others and with what's around us began roughly 15,000 years ago. Another new discovery for us. We're older than we thought. There was more going on in understanding nature than we thought. So this particular cycle, this 6,500-year-old cycle, that in parts of it happen every 500 years, this Aries point generational minor grand trine, some call it the magic triangle. This cycle occurs every 500 years. Either the Aquarian age is kind of arriving, AI might be a signpost to that, or George L. Orwell was right. So some call this a year of enlightenment. Some call it a young male firehorse year of enlightenment. And in Western zodiacal work, Western astrology, we call it a year of enlightenment, where those 3 planets that were discovered via telescope, you couldn't see them with the naked eye. They weren't part of the common experience ever in man. Astrology is about 3 million years old. Humankind is about 3 million years old. So we're looking at cycles for the last 3 million years as a species. That's what astrology is, looking at cycles of nature. But these particular cycles, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, that are concordant with Uranus, mid-1700s, Uranus using a telescope, inventing the period of the revolution of America, French and American revolutions, and the Industrial Revolution, where we discovered Uranus, a planet you can't really easily see with the naked eye. So going beyond what you can see, going beyond what you can materially encounter in nature, Uranus, think of uranium. Neptune, 1846 was its discovery. So think about what happened in mid-1846, mid-1800s, the rise of understanding chemicals and gaseous states of chemicals, the expansion of the periodic table of elements, and also the Opium Wars, the British Opium Wars. Drugs, Neptune therefore has a coincidence with drugs and altered states and consciousness. So Uranus discovered in the mid-1700s. The coincidence of its discovery, named by astronomers, not astrologers, is revolution. So Uranus, the planet of revolution. Neptune, the planet that's about drugs and chemicals and altered states. Neptune, the god of oceanic. The sea is so placid, but there's so much going on underneath you can't see. Like in your birth chart, Neptune symbolizes where in your family system there was something going on that you can't really readily see. Another really important thing. So this 500-year period, 2026, well, AI, robotics, data centers going up like crazy. Data centers sucking in, the aquifer. Data centers to answer one question, a cup worth of water or more per question. Think about that. What happens to that water? What's the quality of that water? Can you re-drink that? 1526, the last 500-year period roughly of this Neptune-Uranus-Pluto alignment. Pluto-Plutonian, by the way. Italian High Renaissance. In 1527, the Italian High Renaissance ends. The sacking of Rome. And a kind of reversal of culture. So we had a high culture and high Renaissance, and suddenly a reversal of culture. 500 years ago, huh? A cycle that occurs every 500 years, like now. High culture and a sudden reversal. No, one event doesn't mean anything. Interesting. Cortez conquers the Aztec Empire and brings smallpox. That was interesting. And horses to North America. Magellan circumnavigates the globe. The early Reformation of Martin Luther. 500 years before that, roughly 1026, Viking expansion, the first Europeans on this continent. The Song dynasty is at its peak, and the Holy Roman Empire is rocking and rolling. So major cultural shifts is what happened every 500 years that have a huge, massive, shift with consciousness and humankind direction. In the U.S. chart, The chart that we're looking at here is a map of the sky, the birth chart of the U.S., July 4th, 1776, 5:10 p.m. Some astrologers say, when was that declaration signed? But most of us agree 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia, right? In fact, that degree rising on that left part of the chart, 12 degrees Sag, when 9/11 happened, Pluto is right on the ascendant. In a birth chart, the ascendant, what's rising, is the body of the person or the body of the nation. Plutonium on the body of the U.S. chart on 9/11 during that year. Saturn was exactly opposite on the descendant, which deals with other or enemy. Saturn, Chronos, Father Time, and it's about material challenge. The two opposing each other, material challenge in a plutonic kind of plutonium, plutocratic kind of a way. It's explosive is what it is. And that's on the U.S. chart 9/11. So I like this chart at 5:10 p.m. So this grand minor trine connects to the fact that Pluto has an orbit of 248 years, and these 3 or 4 years, it's 4 billion miles away, so it's a long 3, 4, 5-year cycle. We're in the first, for our nation, the first Pluto return to where it was when we were born. We have Pluto opposite the sun of the U.S. chart. That sun is that circle, like a sun in the sky, and the sun symbolizes spirit force. In your birth chart, your sun placement describes your spirit manifesting, the energy of your being as a conscious, the light of day, light of consciousness. And Judeo-Christian symbolism, the circle of spirit. For the moon, the half crescent of soul, and the cross of matter. That's an important. Remember that circle of spirit, the moon, half crescent of soul, cross of matter. When we get to Venus and Mars, you can think about that one and connect the dots pretty quick on that one. So here we have a Pluto return, where it was when we were born. What was our birth about? What was our Declaration of Independence about and from? Plutocracy opposite the spirit of the nation. Monarchy opposite the spirit of the nation, right? That's what our national 4th of July holiday is all about. Celebrating that spirit versus domination of plutocrats. So when in 1930 they discovered Pluto and plopped it into the U.S. chart, they said, holy mackerel, look at that. The planet that symbolizes plutocracy and domination and dictatorship is opposite the U.S. sun. Like the monarchy, that's right. What happens when Pluto comes back to where it was when we were born? Will the U.S. continue? That was a discussion in 1930 when Pluto was discovered and plopped into the charts by astrologers. We're going to have our first Pluto return, and Pluto will be again opposing the U.S. sun. Will it mark the death of the U.S. as an entity, as an experiment? Looking kind of challenging these days. Simultaneously, we are having a Uranus return. Its orbit is 84 years, and this year, 2026, started a little bit in 25. What happened in 25? Uranus, the planet of revolution, returns to where it was when we were born. You see that Uranus on the right side of the chart. Uranus in the sky is right back. So we have Pluto back where it was when our nation was born, plutocracy. We have Uranus, uranium, revolution, right back where it was when we were born. And we have a third planet. Neptune is at the bottom of our chart. And the way you read a chart, folks, is the top of the chart, the sun rises, culminates at noon, you go to work, sets at 6 p.m., and the bottom of the chart is midnight. So in a person's chart, your home, your roots. We have Neptune crossing the bottom of our chart. Neptune has a 165-year orbit. When's the last time Neptune was at the bottom of the U.S. chart? The beginning of our Civil War. So we have the planet that was happening back where it was, Uranus, revolution. We have plutonium, and we have Neptune ideologies at the foot of our nation's chart. The hub, the midnight point, the nest, the bed, the root, the home, and the family. So we're going through, for a human being, you don't see this, This is like 3 major, really huge cycles. A 248-year cycle, a 165-year cycle, and an 84-year cycle, all simultaneously right on the U.S. chart. If that were a person, you'd think, you'll be moving, you'll be going to jail. I don't know what, you'll be having something really, you wouldn't say that, but something radical is going on here. I think it's interesting too that this minor grand trine, this flow, think of a pyramidal energy when you think of a trine or a grand trine, a pyramid, it's a minor triangle, has that Neptune at the bottom. It's kind of interesting, it's inverted, it's like upside down. It's not like, pyramidal strength is kind of inverted. Astrology is weird that way, that the symbolism, Carl Jung would say, this is cool, since Carl Jung was an astrologer. He wasn't just even a kind of a student of astrology, he was a practitioner of astrology. Jung said, I would not treat a patient without their horoscopus in my lap in front of me. Jung would look at that symbolization, that coincidence, that minor grand trine upside down and think, upside down. It's kind of a interesting pattern in and of itself. So we're in a Pluto cycle. Pluto and its transition from one sign to another, because its orbit like a comet, it's very elliptical. It can zoom through a sign in 15 years, or 13 years roughly, or 30 years. So those of us who have parents or grandparents, I have parents, who were born in the Pluto Cancer generation, that goes back to 1914 through 1920s, 1930s. Then we had the Me generation, Pluto and Leo. So, Tenzin Bob and anyone born, anyone's like around 70, 80 years old was part of that Pluto Leo generation, the Me generation. Think Leo, summertime. What's the summertime about? All the things I'm going to do when I have freedom and have the weather and have time off from work in the summertime. So the summertime, including having a baby, is like, the entrance of what we want, what we're going to do. So Leo is all about the doing of what one wants to do. That's the opposite of wintertime. It's summer. You got time, all the time in the world. The sun's up, long days, short nights. So Pluto through Leo indicates plutonium or energy in a Me generation kind of a way. I was part of the Virgo and Pluto and Virgo generation. So when we kind of fast forward here, Pluto, plutonium, energy, power. Pluto went through Libra, the sign of the balance and scales in marriage. That happened in the 70s. That's when divorces began to happen. Pluto went through Scorpio in 1984 through 95. Anybody know what Scorpio rules? On some like medical astrology, what part of the body Scorpio rules? Sex organs. Yeah, AIDS, the AIDS crisis. Pluto then went into Sagittarius, 95 through 2008, 2010 roughly. Those years, those 13 years. What happened during 95 through roughly 2008? Pluto in Sagittarius. Sagittarius rules winter solstice above the equator. Winter solstice. It's about lighting the hearth. It's about lighting the menorah. Winter solstice, lighting the fireplace, lighting the candle of truth. So Sag is about conceptualizations and religion and philosophical ideas and spirituality. It's the winter time, and the sun's at its lowest, we go within and we reflect. Jihad, Pluto, the generation of jihad, religious wars. Pluto Capricorn, we just came out of that one. Astrologers said when Pluto goes into Capricorn, 2008 through 24, well, what is Capricorn? Wintertime. Survival, function, structure. Capricorn is all about the functional structures, like not partying and blowing bubbles in the front lawn in summer, but taking care of business. In other words, if you're born the wintertime baby, if you're a wintertime baby, mom and dad are taking care of business. They don't really have time to blow bubbles in the front lawn. It's not summertime, it's wintertime. You are born into a time of function. So Capricorn's function. And it governs business. Business is business. It governs corporations. Pluto is plutocracy. So what happens when you have plutocracy moving into a realm of business? You have, I guess you have megalithic corporations like, Amazon and Facebook and so forth, and AI. So Pluto and Aquarius, remember back in the 60s when the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter aligns in Mars, then Aquarius, the age of Aquarius. And it sounds so groovy, the age of Aquarius. But whenever you transition from one generational age to another, there is the breaking through. I think of the incredible time of the Summer of Love, 1969. There's the breaking through, and then there's the backlash. What's that? Yeah. So we're in another phase of change, where we're growing in consciousness, where in fact children 4, 5, 6 years old have friends around the planet. I mean, that's crazy. If you told my grandmother, who was born in the late 1800s, who remembered Brooklyn as being hundreds of brooks and farms as far as the eye could see in Brooklyn, and little carriage crossing, rivulet crossing bridges, and everyone in carriages, she couldn't imagine Brooklyn as it is today. She sure as hell couldn't imagine this. And grandchildren communicating with grandchildren in Japan, readily, or Timbuktu. That's the Aquarian age, breaking through. Aquarian age, Aquarius, the sign, it's an elemental sign of air, mental, verbal communication. So we're in a phase of generational communication, a change in generational communication. Those time periods that coincide with Pluto and Aquarius. The French and American revolutions, the Copernican revolution, the Islamic golden age. These are the last times that Pluto entered Aquarius. Major times of revolutionary technological change. I mean, for God's sakes, Newton and Galileo, think about that. So we are indeed, with AI, undeniably, we kind of try to normalize it, but we are in a radical, groundbreaking time with radical implications about humanity. And it's Pluto. Pluto's the symbol here. Pluto's the cycle. Plutonium, plutocrats, dictators, people in power, corporatization, corporatocracy. This is all Pluto stuff. And I don't know that mankind has managed that so well so far. So again, here's the U.S. chart with some major cycles, other cycles to look at. For those astrologers who are watching, or who know anyone here who knows astrology, these are the solar arc cycles, those big, major lifetime sort of evolutionary growing cycles that we all have. So 2025-26, Saturn structure on our Mars, military campaigns. The career angle, the midhaven on Uranus, where we have a Uranus return now, revolution. I mean, so this chart says, military campaigns, revolution. I love this one. Mars at the bottom of the chart on the U.S. moon. So in a birth chart for a nation, the moon, symbolizes what it does in your personal chart, like a moon cycle for a woman, mommy, daddy, mommy especially, children, the home, the womb of the nation, the family. So the moon in political astrology, in a birth chart of a nation, describes the people, also women. Mars, cycles of war. Mars has a 2-year orbit, so it's cycles of action, cycles of focus, and cycles sometimes of aggressive, young fire horse, right? It's aggressive, intense, it's potential implication with women. It's either women's rights or more likely, and we see what's happened in the last couple of years with abortion rights and women's personal freedom. Mars, the god of war, on the U.S. moon, women. Mars, the god of war, on the people. We are experiencing it. You could see these cycles years ago and think, gee, what does that mean in 2025-26? And Mars is going to be approaching that moon. Coupled with the other cycles, you got to think, that's some big stuff. That's some really huge stuff. Those are when some big cycles are unfolding. At the top of the chart, the outer world, what the outer world perceives, we have Pluto on the career angle of the U.S. chart. And there was the apex of the outer world manifestation, what the world sees about our nation. Like, I love this one little tidbit, right? What planet in the inner wheel do you see on top of the U.S. chart? The one with the little trident there, that's Neptune. Neptune was discovered in the 1800s. And what did we discover in the 1800s? film and film emulsion. So the outer world sees the U.S. in terms of what? Hollywood. Media, Hollywood, maybe even propaganda too these days, but what the message, Marshall McLuhan had some words, if I recall Woody Allen had some words too about Marshall McLuhan, but the media is the message. So our media, our gizmos, our message, our ability to message the world, it says that we are big on messaging and big on movies. And Neptune is also ideologies, big on ideologies. So Pluto is right there, another Pluto cycle at the top of the U.S. chart, like right at the top. Pluto again, plutocracy, dictatorships. That's what's going on in the U.S. chart. Something about power. It's also about power systems, like lunar regolith for fusion, or wind or solar power perhaps, versus Pluto, the god of the underworld, petroleum, the petroleum industry. Right? So, this isn't exactly sounding all that encouraging, and in some ways, developmentally, it's growing pains at least. These are big growing pains. And again, back to the great responsiveness meditation. Back to the idea of the space-like equipoise. This is the other piece of this particular cycle. There's a different manifestation of this major 6,000-year cycle. Neptune of ideologies and spiritual ideologies, Uranus of revolution, and Pluto of fusion. So one possibility here is that we are at a massive turning point of modern man. We're at and we kind of know that, don't we? They project that AI can help us solve incredible problems. Maybe AI can help us with data centers sucking all the water out of the aquifers. I guess it can. But we're at that time to review where we place our attention. So in your personal chart, if you will, all these cycles is about where do you place your attention. If this is a time of major sort of awakening, where do you place your attention? Where is your illumination? And so here in this winter solstice, it is again about illumination. Where am I finding? What am I working on? It's a great thought. I always say with couples, that's always a great thing to do occasionally within a coupling. What's happening for you? Where are you growing? In what way are you growing? What are you working on? Like you show me yours and I'll show you mine. How are you growing and how am I growing? Can we be aware of how we're growing? That's a really important thing also. Can we be mindful? And at this time period, with these kinds of massive national, international, and really sort of larger than that, these are cultural, massive cultural reformations. In what way am I relating to it? How do I make sense of that in my personal world? Who am I with that? It's kind of like my grandmother born in the late 1800s, with a carriage going through all the hundreds of brook crossings across the farms of Brooklyn. How did she make sense of man landing on the moon? It was tough for her to bridge that gap. Those of you who know me know every time I fire up a computer, it's tough for me to bridge the gap, of what maybe Zoom has done, to disable me from getting onto Zoom. I wrestle with things like that. But joking aside, it is about where is your focus in this idea of advancing. This is a time of hyper action. We recall Al Gore showing us the table that shows how we evolved and the carbon footprint. And over the aeons, 200,000 years, coring samples show us the carbon footprint, more or less kind of, and then Al Gore shows us the table of the carbon footprint through the roof. So we're in one of those time periods where clearly in so many ways we know. Does the astrology show that? It does. Does it show that it's a time of extraordinary plutonic, I always think of Hiroshima, huge, it's about energy. So in your personal charts, Pluto symbolizes where are you generationally growing? What are you doing in making sense of the generation from which you came and the one that's following you? So, Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen A, Gen B that's coming right now. Where are we in relationship to those generations? I'm just hitting a point, literally age 65 in a few days, where wow, I'm a senior? Like, what the hell? How did that happen? That's plutonic for me, I mean, I'm definitely not ready for the cane yet, and I'm going to do my best to not be. But given all of what we just discussed in robotics, I guess who the hell knows what can happen in 10, 15, 20 years as I start heading toward the cane. I mean, my knees are definitely feeling it from my, trailing leg and hurdling in high school. I used to bash the hell out of the high. I got the record for the low hurdles, but the higher hurdles were different. And my trailing leg knee says, man, that didn't feel good. So we'll see about knee replacement soon or whatever else comes, maybe something less dramatic. It is the new age after all. But it is sort of a gauging, where we are in the material mortal. But also, that's why I was thinking, space like, equipoise. This is a cup, but it's really electrons and protons, This is a person and an ego and an ego trip, but it's really just another incarnation, This is this lifetime as an astrologer, but definitely not the first. It really isn't, I know. I mean, I took to it like a fish to water, but, Beethoven, we see that, and a lot of, people do all kinds of, we all have a gift. Maybe we could say with all of this, where is my gift? Where am I gifted? Not just what do you do, or what do you like to do, but really, where is your gift? Where is each person's gift? You're really, idealizing each person's gifted self, which is really like saying your God self. When I was a little younger, maybe in my 20s, and this stuff didn't barely exist yet, computers, they said, the computer generation is here, and when we have computers, we'll have so much time for our families and our kids and our lovers, and the computer will make it all so fast that you can just, you'll be able to kick back. I mean, I am, 24/7, and my clients in LA they can't even have a session with me. They have to be on the phone taking me to Starbucks with them, usually. And my clients in Manhattan are like, I don't give a damn about any of that. I want what I want immediately now, yesterday, It's all hyper, it's this grand minor trine, Neptune, ideologies. And by the way, at that Aries point, we mentioned that. What is that Aries point? Remember I said about the 4 turning points of the seasons? And the Aries point, March 21st, being the beginning of the whole growing cycle. So for astrologers, we see that not just symbolically in a morphic field, or in a Jungian, as above, so below kind of, I forget the term I'm looking for with Jung. I don't know why, I'm in Neptune land right now. Neptune is consciousness. Neptune is collective consciousness. Neptune is envisionment. Neptune is receiving. Neptune is being a receiver. What kind of receiver are you, and what are you receiving? What are you tuned into? Where do you place your consciousness? It's a really big thing. That Aries point is that beginning. You can kind of say it's like the morphic field creating. Where am I being creative? Where is he? Where is she? Where are they, them? Whatever. I know I'm showing my age there. But where are we? Who are we? Who do we choose to be? We are in a place where we can really choose to be more than ever before. There's 8 billion of us, soon to be 10, which is in itself kind of shocking. We've gone from when I was, 20-year-old to 65. We went from 4 billion to 8 billion. That happened, Consider what we've done in basically 500 years of modern science. Consider where we came from Newton. Consider where we came from Galileo. It's only been a flash of time. And now, I guess Arnold Schwarzenegger is coming for us. It's a powerful time. What do you do with that? And shouldn't we be deeply thoughtful about what we do with it? And shouldn't the tail wag the dog, the dog wag the tail versus the tail wagging the dog? Because pretty soon, So it really is a time of the positive. There are a lot of astrologers who see this configuration with Neptune ideologies not being a replication of where our ideological war was the last Neptune cycle for the U.S. chart, the beginning and middle, sort of early nascent periods of the Civil War, that ideological issue. I mean, I'm actually thinking about something I won't say, but it is kind of difficult. But they're taking this person, they're taking their jobs. The reference I'm making politically right now. They're taking people's jobs. They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs. There's an ideology, an ideological challenge here. An ideological challenge that we're having. And it's a challenge to raise ourselves to a higher state of consciousness. But I think we can say, the materialization, the material world has become, in some ways, certainly Western man's God. All of us here, though, really have honor for indigenous peoples, indigenous cultures, and the culture that is, of consciousness, the culture of our humanity. That's what we're about. But there are so many people who, are not focused on that. I'm paraphrasing a dilemma, but I believe it's something like, why is it Americans are so focused on the next Mercedes or the next thing that they will make them feel better? When the inevitability is as you get older, you have pains and you ache and you age, and this is the nature of it, staving off and keeping that at bay, not being in concordance with it, has been such a Western way, rather than living in concordance. It's one reason that Woodstockers live in Woodstock. But what's happening here in the Catskills protected forest is kind of rare, because so many places around our country and around the world are changing rapidly. Going from 7 billion to 8 billion itself has seemed to be a turning point. So nothing I'm saying isn't something all of you know. We could all chat about it, and we do, don't we, all the time. But here is just the evidence that what does the larger cycles suggest? We're at a wonderful, fantastic time, a 500-year Renaissance time of leaping into a new level of consciousness. Although, I kind of think of Captain Kirk, what's his name? William Shatner, thank you. Going up in the penis rocket, the rocket to outer orbit, and coming down and being in tears. And one thing I recall that he was saying, William Shatner, was, Captain Kirk, being out in space, he thought how phenomenal, but he looked down and said, oh my God, it's so fragile. From space, the Earth's atmosphere is so phenomenally thin. And it's such a fragile blue planet. And you realize the blackness, the limitlessness of space and our home place here. The idea of populating Mars or populating the moon, interesting ideas, but I think getting this right first seems to be, in my mind, a little more rational. So here we are with all those powerful cycles. Another big one is this Venus-Sun thing, this Venus-Mars conjunction we have. They're all right on top of each other this particular year. This only happens, by the way, Venus, Sun, Mars, every 32 years in wintertime signs of Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius. The wintertime signs of inward-going consciousness. So Venus, the circle of spirit, riding on top of the cross of matter. In other words, what one perceives and feels defines how we act or materialize. Mars, well, we've added a little arrow, but Mars is, like on the bathroom door, the reverse. Mars is the cross of matter resting on or dominating the circle of spirit. Like Alexander, you take this rifle and go shoot that son of a bitch. I don't care what you feel about it. That's Mars, action. We put action and will, the solar power, the will, ahead of our feeling about it or our thought about it. So we're taking the principle of Venus, love, Mars, action, or Venus, the goddess of love, Mars, cycles of action and or sometimes war, and the sun in between, consciousness. It's a time, astrologically speaking, in a Western model, for us to review relationship. We're reviewing our relationships, our relationship to each other, and our relationship to the world, and our relationship to people, our relationship to family members, really what we should be looking at too is the marriage of our parents and how, coming from that marital model, I have taken that forward, or I have familiarized that in either intentional action or autopilot. Most of us are on some form of general familiar autopilot, more than you realize. I mean, most people have the phenomenon, even me, where you have a certain family or marital dynamic you're born into at a certain phase of that marital family dynamic, and you wind up having things that are beautiful and wonderful and things that are challenging. You have a model, an example of being healthy and aligned as a being, and you have a model in relationship or marital relationship of mom and dad of where they're not in perfect alignment. And both of those are models that we carry forward in a very familiar way. Thanks for reminding me, because I always say to clients, the way we cough, the way we laugh, the way we sneeze, the way we cry, the jokes we tell, this is so familiar. And we don't think about, gee, that's interesting, I'm coughing like my father. Or gee, I'm joking like my dad. Or I'm expressing feelings or not expressing feelings like my mother. We carry that familiar material forward. And that's what a person's birth chart is about. It tells us what that dynamic was. So when I read your birth chart for a person, I'm not just saying this is what the chart tells me about you. This is the roadmap of your soul discussing what you experienced as a soul that's drawn to these two people, because you probably have some karma with them, some connection with them. Undoubtedly, you almost always do. And the soul is drawn to these others, like souls who are in similar consciousness. And these people are going through their groove, and you're absorbing it. And you're out of the womb. Mom had a human come out of her body, and mom and dad are, as Tenzing said today, sometimes you faint, whatever happens. It's a whole new reality is hitting you. And you're going through a new reality. New dawn, new day, new baby. And what's happening for mom and dad? The dog, the cat, and the little kid are absorbing it. Those synapses are firing immediately. Fight or flight. A newborn human can't grab the car keys and say, you guys are having some shit. I'm going to take a little break. I'll come back when you're better. So we're absorbing that. This Venus-Mars cycle is a time when we are meant to review those relational concepts of what we're bringing, what we're doing, what we've done. Not only in present relationship, but in past relationships. What have we brought to this dynamic, and how is it in any way modeled on where we came from? It almost always has some modeling. Like in short form, your birth chart will tell us about career and so forth, and that career almost always is an extension of that modeling, usually to improve upon it or solve it or fix it or make good with it. It wasn't intentional. My first present going podcast and the title, gee, what do you want to do with your podcast, Alan Alexander? What's the title of your podcast? What I do with my clients best, what I've been working on my whole 65 years. What the hell happened? What was that? The Astrology of Karma and Family. The Astrology of Family, Karma, and Relationships is my podcast. The Astrology of Family, Karma, and Relationships. Because that is us. You are genetically handed down. Your chart describes that genetic lineage, describes mom and dad and their mom and dad. Your chart can't go quite past that leap of great-grandparents usually, but the lineage is there in the chart, not just symbolically. I mean, it's crazy with charts. They really actually can be literal. Like son, daddy next to Neptune. Your father was in the Navy. I mean, that's very common. Or, sun in your chart next to Neptune. Your father was an oceanographer. Or sun Neptune, your father had an alcohol drug problem. Or sometimes both. Yeah? So the Jungian symbology is both metaphoric and literal at the same time. It's both describing you coming to consciousness and being, and the whole soup of what you came into. And that's why you were born into that soup, with that genetics. It's all part of the continuum. Again, I'm percolating, in my beginning to learn through Bob, space-like equipause. Thank you. It sounds like something I would learn in astronomy about planetary, and it is. So by the way, the last years we had this space-like equipoise of Venus-Mars relationship, 2026, 1994, 1962, 1898. Each of these years, like I'm thinking about 1962, what happened in 62, and 63, JFK, all that was happening with the Cuban Missile Crisis. These are all turning points, massive, major turning points in history for us to think about. This major lunar standstill. Well, I've got the pictures here of geolithic forms that early man, Paleolithic man, built because they saw not just the turning of the seasons, as we know, the proverbial sun, at Stonehenge, but they saw that major lunar standstill, major lunar formations, those visible times when the moon is rising really high in the north and really high overhead, as equating with times of huge social unrest and social change. And we're in one of those time periods. 1941, what was happening then? World War II. 1959, not long after Korea and the rise of what led to Vietnam. 1978, post-Vietnam and that whole sort of new era. 1997, that's kind of a weird one, but it's kind of the computer age. The rise of computers is one of those major themes. 2015. So we're looking also at this time period of restructuring, I guess, Gen Y, Gen Z. It's a whole new culture, 2015. These are all major cultural shift periods. And lastly, this ring plane crossing thing. What Saturn looks like through my telescope on a really, really, really steady night, especially in the Florida Keys where there's no mountains and it's no twinkle. You can see Saturn just like that. So we have that ring plane crossing. And ring plane crossings happened also at key times. So astrologically, the rings symbolize in the planet limitation. Saturn cycles for everybody's chart. Wherever it is in your chart, Saturn's got a 30-year orbit. And so Saturn cycles always, for every human, coincide with the first square, age 7. I'm an independent human. I don't like broccoli. The first opposition, age 14. I'm an adult and you idiots don't know anything. You become ossified and rigid, which is partly true of mom and dad who probably have become somewhat ossified and rigid. The first closing square of Saturn to where it was when you're born, age 21. I'm really an adult now, and I really can do my own thing. Saturn return, age 28 and a half to 30. I'm really an adult. I'm reviewing what I've built. I'm reviewing what I've done. I'm reviewing what I've chosen for my outer world personality, and now I'm defining it further. So age 30, I'm an adult. Age 60, I'm now really an adult. I thought I was at 30, but I didn't know diddly-do. And the 90-year-olds say, oh, you 60-year-old kids, you don't know shit. You're only 60. Well, you're a baby, you're 60. The 90-year-olds say, well, you get to 90, you know what's going on. Or as you're approaching that third Saturn return. Saturn cycles coincide with developmental milestones. Every teacher knows developmental milestones. That's what Saturn is, coincidentally. Saturn isn't doing it to us. It just so happens Saturn's 30-year orbit and Saturn's arrangement to its own placement in your chart. Age 7, first square, 90 degrees. Age 14, it always opposes. Age 21, closing square. Just like the moon phases, by the way. Phases of God, phases of creation. So Saturn coincides with developmental milestones. And when Saturn, its ring system, meaning sort of constraint. Saturn, as the most distant planet before telescopes. Think about it, age 30. You were getting old. You go back a couple 100,000 years, less than that, you'll be dying soon. Age 60, oh, you'll be dying soon. Now in modern, age 90, you'll be dying soon. Pretty soon, age 120, age 110, you'll be dying soon. We'll be pushing limits of aging to well into 100 commonly in a planet full of 8 billion right now. That's interesting. So whenever Saturn's rings have either been brought way open, Saturn, by the way, will be brighter in the sky visually. That's an interesting phenomenon of it. You can see it. You can encounter it. It's right there in the sky. And when Saturn's rings go edgewise from our line of sight, Saturn gets really dim like it is right now. So one of the times recently when Saturn's rings disappeared, we elected Barack Obama. When Saturn's rings were wide open, Trump won. Saturn's rings symbolize to an astrologer, astronomer, the limitations of the age of 7, 14, 21, 30, etc., etc. The limitations and definitions of self and the world. So when the rings disappear, like Obama, some limitations simultaneously seem to go away culturally. When the rings are wide open and it's really entrapped in this ring system that describes cultural holding on or holding back, it defines. Trump won, rings wide open, we are defined. Right now the rings are disappeared. All limitations are off. I mean, it's true. All limitations are off. What happened to limitations? What happened to checks and balances? Oh, poof, gone. No. Oh, well, the judge decrees Salzberg that that was not okay with those prisoners. Yeah, what are you going to do about it? No checks and balances. No intention about the frame of reference that we share. That's again about that minor grand trine. Think of a pyramidal flow between revolution, Uranus, Pluto, energy, and Neptune ideology. A flow of, like a renaissance, a flow of a higher way of being. And part of the background is this disappearing ring system. All boundaries are off. Yeah, right now, there are no boundaries. And is that an okay thing? Should we have no boundaries to AI? I mean, what will happen next? We really don't know. And the truth is, we really, really don't know. And when it comes to communication, we have different views about it, but for instance, Snowden told us, what do you know? They're listening all the time. I turned Siri off about a month ago. You used to use it. Hey Siri, ask a question. No, it's always lighting up. The damn thing still lights up. It's like, what's going on there? It's all about boundaries. I'm one of the first people to say I think boundaries is not a great word. I think processing, connecting, interweaving, mindfulness is a better word than boundaries. But sometimes boundaries are good. Sometimes like not mining the Rocky Mountain National Park, good. Not strip mining the Rockies, good. Some boundaries are necessary. So we can see a list of when we have ring plane crossing events. Galileo discovers we're not the center of the solar system. The Boston Tea Party, the storming of the Bastille, the Korean War, U.S. enters Vietnam, the fall of Saigon, the Obama presidency. Somewhere in these ring plane crossings or rings wide open, there's also things like Pol Pot, in the killing fields. So extremes. Saturn cycles are about material world and extremes. So that's kind of the general groove here. What does it mean? It means that we're in a time of extraordinary movement, extraordinary intention, and really mindful intent, more important than ever. And in a material way, my mindful intent, if I choose to share that, it can go global. I mean, my podcast and my YouTube channel are global, I couldn't have done it until now. And now even AI helps write some of the summarizations of each. That's very helpful. What? That's well written, better than I could have written it. So, I've got a bottle of water for each show with AI being used. So yeah, it's a time of powerful rethinking, creative shaping of the future, spiritualization, hopefully, the idea of your particular soul, your gift, their gift, and how to uplift the gift we each have, which really means, the flow, the alignment. The gift isn't just a gift, it's where you're really aligned. I think when you have a person with a gift, we go to watch someone on stage do their gift when they forget themselves, they forget their ego state, and they're in a channelship of great spirit. That's a gift. And that's really what we can all super now share and connect with, and that's our focus, is where is our gift and our spirit. Or we can commoditize it. We can sell it. We can, bank it. We can data center it. I guess that's our choice. So thanks for listening. Feel free to reach me via that QR code thing that I've kind of learned how to use. Questions, thoughts, comments, opinions, information. Yeah, please.
Should I use a mic or?
You have a mic for, and Anji? Yeah.
Anjana.
Anjana, right, sorry, Anjana. Is there a mic? Oh.
It's coming.
That sounded like God was arriving. Piotr, God, Piotr.
Dun, dun, dun.
Thank you.
26, it's coming.
It is coming. Well, that is kind of, it's a renaissance, right? That's right. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was incredible.
Thank you, Anjana.
So I'm noticing that I don't have a good feeling right now because of, it feels like there's a lot of intensity coming.
There's a lot of intensity.
And you may have referenced this earlier, but what advice do you have for us as we enter this year in terms of?
Well, so what advice do I have as we enter this year? Number one, I would have us all review the cycle. And nothing, summertime doesn't just occur. The winter blizzard doesn't just occur. It's a phase. We've been watching this phase occur. And so if we watch the phase and observe our relationship to the phase, and if we observe the relationship around us to the phase, it kind of, what's happening externally, what's the zeitgeist under which I'm operating, and what am I doing with that zeitgeist? How am I making sense of it? How am I grounding it? How am I spiritualizing it? How am I intentionally, philosophically framing it is, I think, a very important piece. So we've already been doing this. This isn't new. It's just we're seeing more and more cycles as a roadmap, that are saying, yeah, it's more and more as it feels is intensely happening and going to continue to happen. And so it's about reviewing what you wish. What do you envision? What do we all envision? What's our envisionment? What's our collective envisionment? The zeitgeist has been that most every client that I've sat with for the last 3 years particularly, it started back when we had the banking crises of 2009 through 10. Most everybody, after that banking crisis of independence and freedom and values and valuation and resources, whatever, everyone's really looking for freedom, and they're also looking for their community. A theme, I swear, almost every single client. The chart says you're looking for your sense of self, you're looking for freedom and spiritual communion, and you're looking for community, and you're seeking your people who get you. That's a very, very, very common theme. I've seen these different themes over the decades, but this is the first time that it's really like a mass sort of inward-minded exodus or searching for connection. So to be mindful about what that is, and how can we bring that? How can we be that connection? That's always a very, very important piece. How can we embody that connectingness, that connectedness, that spirit? That's the super important piece. Or, do we instead, with all the challenges, do we become, really humanly engaged in the challenge? And when the challenge is hit, what do you do with that? That's really important. Yeah. I hope that kind of answers what you're asking. Yeah.
Well, that led into my question, which is if these cycles and patterns are preordained by the planets.
What? The planets are not preordaining anything. The road sign is not making the road curvy. The road sign does not make the road curvy. The road sign describes the terrain.
Okay.
The planets are describing these cycles of human awareness. Like, first of all, the cats and dogs, so to speak, didn't discover Uranus, Pluto, Neptune. We did. We have a relationship to our comprehension of the cycles around that. Those signs are road sign, billboards, whatever they describe.
Okay,
So,
I beg your pardon,
no, beg my pardon. I'm just wanting us
Can I finish my
to get it
question?
straight. It's important though that we have,
Okay.
we don't have an idea it's happening at us. That's important.
Okay, well, given this big picture theater of potential events
Right.
that are signposted, what's the point of activism?
Awareness. The number one thing is awareness. Under the awareness is alignment. You know, where am I aligned in a mindful awareness of what it is? You know, what's my relationship to it inside myself and in my immediate relations? I mean, I'm definitely not saying I'm any champion of any of that. I'm a work in progress too. It's just, here we are. So the mindful awareness is the most important thing before one can manifest any action or any, external, interplay. I mean, we all know that, right? But we do have to sort of review. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. So you noted, you had a diagram that the moon and with We the People was the beginning of was in February, yes? So kind of on the back of the activism question, is that the best time? But the moon is, illuminating. So in my perception, in terms of the Venus and Mars, that's, a lot of
Relational.
focus on women's rights and speaking out and, coming out of victimhood and coming into empowerment. Would you say that February is the best time to focus on that, to kind of push it up to the surface?
Great question. So the astrological cycles suggest that the period from mid-September of 95 until mid-May of mid-September of 2025 through mid-May of 2026 is this Venus-Mars-Sun cycle. There's actually a thing in Hellenistic astrology called the Dorophory, where Venus and Mars, or the Dorophoria, or the king's sign bearers, so to speak. They describe the entrance of the king or the queen, the zeitgeist at play. And so the principle of relationship, personal relationships, are really important here, particularly highlighted from fall of 2025 through May of 2026. That's what the cycles are kind of super peak. So there might be themes that are particularly around family and relationship and certainly the feminine and the masculine interplay and women's rights. So yes, you could say these are great times to be thinking and talking and planning and reviewing the role of interweaving, the role of interconnection, how we interweave with each other. It's about our relationship, the personal. So like in a way, start with the personal and work your way out from there, So yes, it is in short term, in a political astrological way, a great time to be interceding and connecting and getting out there in a personal way. I mean, as a lot of people are doing politically on the streets right now. But again, I think it's the joining piece versus the divisive piece. It's really about the relating. It's really highlighting relating, and how I relate is a key. So yes, it is about women's rights now, and it is about working to support. But it's not just about women's rights. It's about sort of human relating focus.
I didn't really articulate my question well in terms of the moon and just the phrase "we the people." So not necessarily women's rights in terms of a divisiveness, but to unify the consciousness of the planet in terms of the importance of embracing the feminine consciousness. Not men, women, but
Right,
masculine power.
Yeah, yang yin, by the way. It's great.
The masculine power to, has a lot of power, is coming in with great power comes great responsibility, and then the force of love coming through to infuse that. Like there's Mars is the god of war, but also there's goddess of war also, and
Well,
for,
actually,
for righteous.
In Aztec astrology, Venus was the bringer of war.
Right. So,
Interesting.
but
Morning star, yeah.
in terms of the moon, and you mentioned I just
let
thought
me
the word
address.
February.
So what you're looking at with the moon in that particular chart was a long-term cycle with the U.S. chart that promises there's a heightened theme around women and women's power in 2024, 25, 26, 27, like this time, these few years, but specifically 25, 26. A theme, Mars, to the U.S. moon, of we the people. Mars, war or militarization or that kind of thing. But it's also about activating the theme of community. So yes, it is that this whole couple of years is really important, and particularly this winter, you could say, into next early spring, mid-spring is really important. Time for community action, community engagement. That is true. It is about the masculine and the feminine energy together in each individual, but it really is the unification. That's really what it symbolizes that we need to be doing. The larger cycle says there may be a theme in our nation around women and families and challenge, which we have seen. We've seen things happen to our neighbors that are what we couldn't have imagined 20 years ago, that's for sure. Yeah. Anybody else? We have time for one or two more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh God, I really don't want to use the mic because it's weird. Okay. I was curious about the difference between Tibetan, Vedic, and Western astrology, and sort of I'm assuming all three have their pros and cons, but what insights, in your opinion, can you glean better, let's say, from Tibetan versus Vedic versus...
That's a great question. So in general, I really can't address Tibetan astrology per se, but I can address more Western and Vedic astrology. So in short form, the culture of Western astrology describes sort of the individual potential that our charts describe, well, literally, your genetics, your family tree, and what you were born into, and how it's imprinted you, and your options to come to consciousness, and not have automacy, but intentional will, you could say dharma. Mm-hmm. Vedic astrology generally is practiced largely sort of as a frame of reference to the culture at large, and to what will largely likely happen for you, or that your culture indicates will happen to you. It's focused intentionally more on sort of prediction or forecasting or cycles or what's going to be for this soul, with the idea of this soul's karma. But it is more about the soul's karma rather than necessarily the dharma. And the two systems loosely, although people who practice Jyotish may disagree with me, but here are the moon's nodes symbolizing karma and dharma. In Jyotish, in Vedic astrology, the north node is seen as a karma, heavy lifting, what you're here to really work on. And in Western astrology, the north node is seen as your dharma, like what you're seeking, and that your karma is more about family autopilot, attachment, where there's attachment. Your south node's where there is automacy and attachment, and where in the family system there might be automacy or autopilot and attachment. And the north node describes where you're going to with mindful intent. Okay? So they're actually inverse in the two systems. They say the exact opposite thing. North node is karma and what's going to be happening for you in Vedic astrology. In Western astrology, north node is where you can create, or we think co-create. So Western astrology is very much about co-creating. Western astrology is also about personality theory. So in loose terms, Vedic astrologers are coming to the West to learn personality and psychodynamic theory in a chart. And Vedic astrology describes who you are in the outer world. So my loaded Capricorn stellium says to the outer world that I'm actually a loaded Sag, and therefore I'm a hippy-dippy who, must smoke pot or something, which I don't, and that, that I'm an astrologer, and that I do occasionally live in my van, and I do go hiking and so forth. That is true of me. So there is a freedom side, and I'm damned that I will be free to do what I do, because this is what I do. It's what I think I was born to do. At age 15, I started. So, professionally. So, that's the Sag part. So a Vedic astrologer would say, well, you're Sagittarius, Alexander. You're freedom thinking and independent thinking, and you're upbeat and you're playful and you take things lightly. And I always think of, like, what do you mean? I'm like I'm the Big Lebowski? I'm the, hey, it's all going to be okay. That is not me. Anybody who knows me in a Western way, I am a Capricorn. I am the astronomer. I bring things down to earth. I need to make logical sense of it. I can't accept an idea system that says, I'm born to a shoemaker and therefore I will be a shoemaker. That is not the Western system. You could be born to a shoemaker, and you could be apparently you could be, well, I was going to say a con man and become president of the entire world. So there's all kinds of things. So the two systems. Vedic astrology describes what the outer world experiences of you. Western astrology describes your emotional personality and your psychodynamic, relational personality. And I think that is a really fair statement to make, that when you look at the two systems and describe personality structure, you will see that the outer world sees me as a hippy-dippy Big Lebowski, because I'm an astrologer. Who the hell does that, But the personal world sees me as, pretty conservative, kind of cautious, needing to build infrastructure and framework, and, kind of seeking even, let's say, scientific relationability to what I do, which is a whole other thing. But, yeah, good question. Anybody
Thank
else?
you.
One last, we have time for one more question?
It's up to you, but
One, yeah, one last question, then we'll wrap up. Any last question? Are we good?
Yeah, I'll ask more.
I was like, I can ask one more.
Okay.
Okay. Whoa. So you mentioned the inner and the outer piece,
Uh-huh.
right? There's the inner development and the outer. And what I'm wondering is, and then I think it was a point where you talked about vocation, like when you're born, it dictates your vocation. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, because there's just so many options now. And then given what's happening in 25 and 26, any advice? I know this is, basically I'm wondering, given all the options for vocation that someone has, and given what's happening in the external world, does it make more sense to go inward and develop internally to stabilize and be resilient through this intensity? Or does it make sense to kind of go out and help? Because, there's a limited energy, right?
There's a couple of questions built into that, perhaps, but so, with our time, would you rather have that I address the collective, or would you rather address the individual's birth chart and what that might describe about vocation? Individual? Okay. So, number one, the birth chart will describe the dynamics of when you came into that family and or social system. And in doing so, and entering that family social system at that particular time in their personal development and growth, that will bring about responses. You see, this is why about Vedic versus Western. The Vedic may say, this is what will happen and where it will go. The Western says, this is the fertile ground that sets a stage of how most anybody would respond. If you're born, let's say you're born into, a parent who's drug addicted and a parent who's struggling with their spouse who's drug addicted, that's going to evoke a response, So your chart will describe what you move through and what you're experiencing, and also the consciousness of those people at that age period of their life. The firstborn child has a different experience of mom and dad than the last child in a family system. They see them as different personalities altogether, perhaps even. When you're 30 or 25 having your first child, and you're 40 having your last child, you have grown and shifted and changed, and your marital dynamic has changed. And that chart will show that change. So the career, the job, and the vocation, and even the skill sets that you develop to be in that family system at that time, watching those parents develop, will alter how you express that in the outer world. You could say loosely, if you're born to parents, generally speaking, in a general McDonaldization kind of a way, right? In a general culture way. If you're born to parents who are young, who are still in their 20s and still forming and discovering self, you yourself will be in a place of discovering self and expressing self, and kind of be about the individual, who I am and what I want. If conversely you're like I was, the last born, you're watching this whole system go down. You're watching the parents age and grow, you're watching the siblings age and grow, and you're watching this whole system unfold, and you have a different frame of reference. And so again, typically, how that gets expressed in terms of career. So in a short way, you could say, you don't need an astrologer. You just need to look at the dance of the family and look at the birth order and where mom and dad were in their growth and development for each child, and how each situation went down to determine from that birth order even what that child's kind of orientation, accommodation, social skills, interpersonal skills, coping skills, what their defense mechanisms might be, and what their skill sets are that they develop. Commonly we develop defense mechanisms or coping skills to get through our early years of childhood, and if we develop them well with reflection and observing self-witness, I think about Ram Dass and watching the movie, watching self do the movie of your life, then you become, you go from automacy to awareness to wisdom. And the wisdom yields a talent. So a person who has phenomenal emotional challenges in the family, they may become skilled at diffusing emotional challenges. They're certainly working with them. Whatever your career is, it always, there's rare exceptions. Your chart, and that dynamic that you were born into, your career is almost always a direct expression of that family system at that time. That's really the best way I could put that. So the chart is a mirror. The chart's not telling me. I can't tell that client whether her daughter is definitely going to have a wonderful or crappy time. It depends on her consciousness. And what I told that client was, you don't want to hear this because you're from a certain culture with a certain idea. You want me to give you a Vedic response in a Western, and your daughter's in a Western culture, so you got a problem there too. If you shift your identity of motherhood toward your daughter, you shift the game. You shift the dynamic. You shift her own sense of herself. And if part of that mom were to even back off from her attachment, like I said to her, stop calling yourself mother or mommy. Tell your daughter to call you by your first name, because that's who you are anyway. She was floored. I can't do that. You better do that. You want to change that dynamic? Step out of that role. Because, when the time comes that you're wearing the depends, that role will change. Why wait? And why wait for the, for the unconsciousness of it? Like step into the role with mindful intent and shed this ridiculous role, yes, it's true, if you've had 20 or 30 or 40 years, 2 or 3 or 4 decades more than that child has had, you're able to navigate more than a 10-year-old can. But when I speak to the 10-year-old granddaughter that's around me, I tell her, I speak to the way to you I would speak to any other adult. I realize you're 10 and you don't have all the other life experience to fully get it, but from person to person, I speak to you the way I speak to anyone else. And I said, what do you think about that? She said, works for me. So I think that's maybe kind of a good place to end, unless there's a burning question anyone has. All right, well, folks, thank you so much for your time and your attention. Thank you.